Kouyate, and I'm the 150th generation of the jelly line from my family. And when I say jelly, like I like to often make the distinction between jelly and the term griot, which is often associated to what it is that we do, but doesn't completely encompass the uh, the responsibility that we serve in the community. So,
Mm.
a lot of times when they say griot, they're referring to storytelling, but I mean, it's really contextualized from the perspective of uh, that peripheral perspective of people observing something and not being able to understand everything that's happening. So when the French come and they see somebody standing in front of a group of people and they're using their oratory skills or they're playing music and there's certain theatrics involved, the assumption is that this person is just telling a story, so you know what ends up happening is even the term griot is a mispronunciation of another oral historian role in the Wolof tradition known as get well. Okay, so um, yeah, the term get well is a Wolof word for their oral historians, and the term griot, since the French don't speak Wolof, they end up coming up with this word. Well, when we talk about the term djeli, djeli comes from the root word in Mandinka eje, right, which means blood, right?
Mm.
So the djeli are essentially, it means good blood, but it's almost like the guardians of blood.
Mm.
And because there's certain attributes that are maintained in the bloodlines of Manding people, certain keys and components that allow them to realize their potential based on their traditions and their history. So essentially, Jelly are the guardians of the secrets in those bloodlines, and they serve in the purpose of being able to help activate that for the generations that are here today, which is an important distinction because it's more than just telling stories. Even though we value the art of storytelling, it's more about awakening, you know, just that internal realization of one's lineage and bringing them uh, just those secrets in the bloodlines of the community, into light so that people can be empowered.
Mm.
This is why jellies were counseled to the kings or counseled to, well, the noble classes called oro. This is why the jelly were also, emissaries. This is why the jelly were uh, figures in the community that, connected families, that resolved disputes, all of these different services to that community because they were imbued with the information, they were imbued with the knowledge of the past. So
Mm.
even in Manding cultures, when families are coming together, for example, people were getting married, you have to go see your jelly first. Like this is
Mm.
the way, like in synopsis. Say one person wants to marry another person. Say the groom he found this young lady and he's interested in marrying her. He doesn't even go there himself. He go to a representative of his family. They both go to the jelly. They say, Jelly, we're interested in you know acquiring the hand in marriage of this young lady from this other family. Jelly says, are you sure? They agree. Then they go to the family. Now, at this point, even still, the jelly is the intermediary. The jelly will say, on behalf of this family over here, they're interested in marrying your daughter. They would like to sit and discuss with you and counsel. They agree. The jelly says again, are you sure you want to do this? If the family says yes, then they meet together. A representative of her family will come with her, a representative his family will come with him, and the jelly is this intermediary. Now,
Mm.
at this point, before, a lot of times we get wrapped up in the romanticism of the movies, but what happens traditionally is the families will sit down and they will ask the jelly to recount history of the different bloodlines then and there
Mm.
so that people know what they're getting into, right? Like how many relationships have we been in where we wish we knew what we were getting into, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even at that point in these unions of families, like a jelly, they're there. they're constrained to, depending on the kind of jelly. Like you have the oral historians, you also have doma, which are like, constrained to, truth in all situations. But
mm,
you have a responsibility to then be able to recount uh, what you know of the family lines. So if somebody 4 or 5 generations down their line was untruthful or unfaithful, or maybe if they were a great person, or maybe they have character flaws, any of those things, you know,
mm,
it's our responsibility to know, because why? Like certain things are maintained in the bloodline, and even though we're all individuals from a perspective, we're all, extensions of our lineage. So if terms were agreed, then from that point it's understood that these two lineages are converging to create a further, you know. So I mean that's one of the ways that jelly serves away from being a musician,
mm,
being a singer or an orator. Even like the different kinds of jelly. You have some that focus in the word Yamakala. You have some that are musicians. You have some that, focus in the traditional arts and secrecy. Like, there's so many different facets of this responsibility that are, uh, that is difficult to understand unless you're immersed in some aspect of the culture.
mhm,
But remember, most people's point of engagement into our cultural framework is they pay money, they sit in a chair, and they observe. They
mhm,
want to be entertained. People entertain. But how many people really know the stories of the things that entertain them in general? When you go to see the ballet, like how many people are actually listening to the story of the ballet? When you go to see an opera, how many people are actually, listening to the story, contextualizing it,
mhm,
you know, from an analytical perspective as well as just, oh, this makes me smile or laugh. But even the science that Jelly choose music and they choose these other things is a very calculated decision, because we understand the permeability of music. We understand that if you want to make people hold on to information, uh, just the value that music can have in ensuring that. Koda is an instrument. It's played by Jali, and Jali are oral historians of Manding people. This is a tool that they use in being able to preserve the history of Manding people. So the Jali have this responsibility of being able to catalog and retain just enormous amounts of information. And one of the methods that they use is being able to document it inside of music. Wow, music is a wonderful tool for being able to hold on to things. So even it's in this inside of the Jolly Orchestra. This is one of the younger instruments inside of the Jolly Orchestra, and even then, it's like 1,300 years old. So you're dealing with some serious time. So 21 strings. You have a calabash. It's covered with cowskin. And y'all will listen to it in a second, so enjoy. They use the music as a vessel for really incorporating that sacred information.
mm,
Um, and it's worked for a long time, almost to the point where people, uh, when they hear Jelly or they hear about just the Mali Empire or West Africa, Manding people specifically, they're automatically associating the musical elements. Where music has never been arbitrary; it's always connected to a larger function of life. So when people are singing about, the social circumstance, when they're singing about the people of the history, when they're drumming or they're creating music around these very concise, specific uh, services. I don't even know what word to use. Um, Contextually, we're dealing with, you know, the paying reverence or respect to a deity that, moves in the cycles with the lunar calendar, that only comes out if certain people have done A, B, C, D, like all of those intricacies that align in order for a rhythm to be played or a song to be made. A lot of times those things are pushed to the side because exoticism is a very alluring thing
Mhm.
for a lot of people that don't take the time to understand. You know, so when you're jelly, a lot of the responsibility is away from uh, the eyes of the community. In terms of learning the traditional spirituality, in terms of understanding the traditional sciences of the instruments and learning the history, sitting down and really, just constant pouring in, like without option. It's like there's no,
Mm.
I mean, the only liberty you have in how it works is, uh, whatever your vocation may be, you could choose, but the responsibility has to be passed on from generation to generation. So not every jelly you're gonna meet is gonna be a performer.
Mm.
Actually, though, it being relegated to the proscenium is a relatively new thing because that's not,
Mm.
how it worked traditionally. There's a lot of stories that revolve around, just adages and life lessons, proverbs.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stories, especially like, Sunjata, where people are recounting, the heroes in society. They're the cautionary tales, Masana Sise, for example. Like, I'm just thinking of different stories that are told with music. Um, and a lot of times, when these stories are shared, it is really to inform and empower within the community. Like, most times, even when Jelly is singing, and some people call it praise singing, but when they're speaking to recount the your ancestry in the community, or just the idea of bringing somebody closer to the best of their nature through their lineage is what's happening. That's why people
Mm.
are so overcome with emotion. It's not just simply that the moment is emotional and abstract, but it's very personal. Like if somebody were to sit here and tell you of your grandmother and your great grandmother and your great great grandmother, and you feel connected to it,
Mm.
and it also serves as a vehicle for ensuring that the community stays connected. So you have different components inside of general manding society that are interdependent, and uh, it works in a way where people aren't lost. What I'm saying? They aren't lost to oblivion or antiquity in a way.
Mm.
Not just the individual, but you remember like every individual is an extension of a lineage. So you know I can walk into a space even if they don't know Amadou. When they hear Kouyate,
Mm.
then they understand what comes with that. You know, so I always thought it was a very beautiful thing. Obviously my experience has been growing up between worlds, so to speak. I mean, it's the same world. It's just you know, it's a larger world than we realize a lot
Mhm.
of times. But I think that at some fractal level, like there's so much similarity in the human experience that all you have to really do is examine it and remove the just the biases that we develop, or just we demystify things.
Mhm.
Because even the mystical is science at some level. It might be a spiritual science, but like it makes sense to someone who takes the time to study and and the discipline of practice. You know what I mean? Because it is a
Mhm.
practice. The music is a practice of a different kind of science, but it's still Like the musician is the doctor, and not in any you know, frou-frou kind of way. We don't just say it, no. If you really understand the components of sound and you understand the components of nature, and you think about, for example, with the djembe, they didn't just give the djembe to anybody. They gave the djembe to the Numo, which is the blacksmith class, which who literally dealt in the elemental sciences of the world. Like they know what spirit is in the tree. They know what element this is in the ground. They know, you know, the power of these different components that create this formula that essentially is projected out to affect others, you know. And that's what rhythms are. That's what the music are. When you create formulas, so to speak. So when a person steps into this participatory endeavor where like human beings are all elements in this formula, you know, certain music is being played, like, you know, we're all creating, you know, this energetic frequency that's happening. Like, you know, you have to be mindful of all those things,
Mhm.
you know. So it's like when you grow up in a cultural framework where everyone is mindful of their contribution to the world, good, bad, or ugly, like you just have to be like, and not just, you know, in the physical sense. Like your energy walking into a space changes the space. You have to be mindful, you know. So when those things are happening, and make sure that the right technology is given to the people who understand the responsibility of wielding it, right? Especially in West Africa, particularly, there are a lot of different cultural traditions that are literally, you know, like some of the phrasing that we use is built on like it's like it is a language, you know. So linguistics are a very key component in understanding it. Even to so in order to understand the drama, you have to, you know, take into account that there are certain linguistic variables that will affect a message or communication. That we have to deal with accents. We have to deal with regional idiosyncrasies that, you know, will effectively change. You know, even to the components that we use to build drums, like, you know, the way that we build djembes, or djeli dunun, or, you know, any of the various instruments that are part of uh, some of the drum orchestras, which are a little more popular. Um, there's certain variations that change because the way that people communicate changes. Now, there's certain phrasing, you know, literally, like when you begin to study, uh, we'll stick with djembe because it's popular. At a certain fundamental level, at the spiritual level, then you realize the foundation of some of the things that we're communicating. You know, and our phrasing is attached to some really heavy stuff.
Mm.
You know, it's attached to you know, just the power of the word, so to speak.
Through this instrument, we can communicate. So we start using this instrument for communication. As you can see, this drum, it talks, but sometimes you have to understand the drum language to be able to tell what it's saying to you. You know? So this drum really talks. It has three different sounds: tone, slap, and bass. So between tone, slap, and bass, the drum has its own vocabulary as well. So the tone, slap, and bass, that's more Western, but for us, we will call tone pay, like the sound pay or te. And slap is called pa or ta. And the bass is called boom or goom. So you have te or pay, and you have pa or ta, and you have goom or boom. So those are the drum vocabulary. So you have to understand that. Like for example, if I want to say pe pa kum. So the pe pa kum, that's the drum vocabulary. Say every time you heard this sentence, it has meanings. For example, this one. This sentence right there, it has the meanings. Anybody who knows about this instrument, who's initiated to this instrument, when they heard this sound, they know exactly what to do. This is a warning. It's telling you, get ready, something is about to happen. Somebody who's not initiated to this instrument and who doesn't have any clue to the drum language wouldn't know what you're saying to them. Okay, so that's how this drum talks. So you have to understand the drum language to be able to tell what it's saying to you. So that's why we call this instrument, talking drum.
If we all believe that the drumming is, in fact, communicating, right? The idea of ideas being received back and forth, then wouldn't it behoove us to understand what, in fact, we are communicating, right? Like the most comforting and romantic thing is to be understood. You know what I'm saying? That's the everybody strives for that at some level. So it's like when we're talking about communication, then we have to talk about what kind of communication. Are we talking about one person standing over here and saying, "Hey, how you doing?" Someone over there going, "I'm fine," or are we talking about specifically? I know with the djembe, knowing the history of the djembe, knowing the spirit that comes with the drum, or we could pick any of the different drum orchestras, but I'm assuming most people that watching this are probably going to be familiar with the djembe at some level. When we're talking about communicating that way, and we understand the djembe coming from a tradition which literally used for bridging this connectivity between the physical and metaphysical. Essentially, you're drumming with a shrine, right? But we don't know. We just do anything, right? Then that means that you're opening aspects or possibly opening opportunities to communicate with forces of the nature and the universe that you may not understand. Particularly in the United States, there was this very consistent effort to exterminate traditional African and indigenous retention. Like, absolutely. Why? And as a result of that, a lot of the interaction that happened between, I guess the dominant culture of today and the traditional cultures of yesterday is a lot of them had to adapt and be hidden in plain sight in ways that people can maintain them. So, you know, obviously when we talk about drumming here in the United States versus the Caribbean versus, in South America, for many years it's punishable by death. Even right now, if I decide to go and drum in front of the wrong building, I could get locked up or shot even today. Especially as a black man, right? Because obviously how it's contextualized in my hands, in my possession, is very much different than in the ways that I feel that, like, as it's made for mass consumption, it's almost defanged and it's made, uh, it's stripped of its cultural integrity in a way that anybody can do anything, right? But there's always been this desire to make these connections. But with djembe specifically, what happens is that when these drums are here, and it's not many of them. Like they've always been guilds. We've always done it in secret. They bury drums during the slavery time, so they can keep the spirit there. Like you have drummers guilds who were carving in the forest, who still exist, and nobody. I don't even know about this stuff. Like it's like this djembe culture that we see outside. That ain't nothing. It ain't nothing. Like what you see outside ain't nothing. Like I say that to say, I'm not gonna. Obviously, I can't disclose the things that I know out of respect, but just you know, this idea that it's coming to popularity here is almost absurd when you think about the fact that there's always been a legacy of retaining African culture by African people. We just had to adapt it, to survive under the violence. Essentially, this shit was not cool forever, even in my lifetime. You know, but I say that to say that the role and responsibility moving forward, I feel, is very much in line with the spirit of the instrument, right? Now, what comes with that, there can be integrity, there can be respect. There's this thing where people can come and learn of a culture and still enjoy it. But then there's also this relationship that a lot of time American society has with tradition, culture, and commodification, right? We talked about yoga the other day. You know what I'm saying? Shoot, look at all the kung fu schools that popped up in the '80s, right? You know what I mean? You can go get any kind of belt from a kung fu school in a mini mall anywhere in America. Like, you know what I'm saying? But all the philosophies and understandings of the martial arts get thrown out the window. The history,
Mhm. Mhm.
all the philosophies and understandings of the yoga traditions. You know, even coming out of India, even coming out of Kemet, couldn't say anything about it, right? You know,
Yeah.
why? Because we have to examine at what point, at what place do things become marketable here, right? What has to be stripped away from them in order for them to be fit for consumption? And in my opinion, uh, a lot of times they have to be stripped of the cultural integrity
Mm.
because we live in a microwave culture where everybody wants to learn things immediately and they don't really have to study or understand. It gets stripped of the sacred. Why? Because sacred means commitment. You don't have a commitment, right? You know what I mean? You have to value things. There's certain parts of the year where they're absolutely not allowed to play. You know, you have to wait for certain things to be in alignment in order to play because you're talking about opening, you know, gateways to certain energetic principles of the universe that you know they really serve the community in this way, in this time, in this context. You know, it's just like you don't necessarily want to let all the energetic principles of the universe. I mean, I can't say let them run wild. Like we don't really control them in the sense that like who's so hubris to think that, but
Mhm.
you know, but you want to move in harmony with the nature around you. You know what I'm saying? So it's
Mhm.
like certain plants don't grow into the season. You know what I'm saying? Like certain things don't happen until the environment is prepared for it to flourish. And drumming and language and drumming works the same way. Like there's going to be a subsequent effect. Does that affect the desired result? You know,
Mhm.
that's to be determined depending on how you use it. So I always think of it again, like I said, like technology. You know, I look at if you look at a djembe, think of it like a MacBook, right? Now, you can use your MacBook to be a doorstop, and it would be a very effective doorstop, right? You know, or you could learn how to use your MacBook, right? And all of a sudden, the possibilities of how you use this technology have expanded, right? Like I look at tradition in that way too. You know, so we're going to innovate, we're going to do things, but learn the foundation of how to be able to engage this tradition. Like when we think about tradition in general, this is like millennia of people in the world studying ways of thriving and being more effective and more harmonious in the environments that they live in. Like that's how you get to be around for thousands of years, right?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
if you're thinking in a very individualistic, unsustainable way, there have been more people that perish thinking that way than are people who move with nature, who move with spirit. So this
Yeah.
technology, these instruments, these the the roles and responsibilities that you see reoccurring, you know, in different cultural frameworks and in different ways, whether you're a jelly, whether you're, you know, a shaman or a soothsayer or, you know, there's a million different terminologies for these people who have interfaced with the physical and metaphysical on this planet. Like, but they all are here because of the journey that others have taken and sacrificed and study. Like, how do we know to eat this plant and not this plant? How do we know to, you know, drink water from this stream and not this stream? You know, it's the same thing with the music. How do we know to play this rhythm here and not this rhythm there? You know,
Yeah.
what are the subsequent effects of introducing this cause, you know, and to this effect, like creating this effect, you know? So when we talk about rhythms that are created for specific purposes, you know, we're talking about, you know, again with the djembe, like djembe being ankaje, ankabe, like, you know, with, and maninka literally means bringing people together for a purpose. Like, this is not a instrument, it's a tool, you know what I mean? Using something that is collectively galvanizing and the energy around the circumstance, you know. So there's a folklore about the instrument, right? Um, how it came. and in this folklore, there had to be a sacrifice of, you know, in order for the drum to come forward. Someone had to be willing to give something they love. Beware of those to whom nothing is sacred. You know, and I really, you'll meet many different kind of people around the world who share different philosophies. They have different points of view, different worldly perspectives. They might even be antithetical to one another, but to most people, there is the sacred. And honestly, when things engage in a world where nothing is sacred that's when things are destroyed. That's when culture is destroyed. And that's more of a universal danger and concern. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause a lot of times the sacred doesn't become accessible until somebody who maybe is in proximity does not value it. You know? And so when I think about drumming in America, I love the fact that people are interested in drumming. Now, when you sit a djembe in front, like to me, and you say, "Oh, I'm interested in djembe," I see an instrument, but I don't see djembe. You know, because djembe is a completely different concept to me. Not because of Amadou Kouyate, but my worldview is framed from a different perspective. Just like if you're sitting in a yoga class and you're doing yoga with somebody that's for 50 generations, their family's been studying yoga, and it's not even a personal thing because you don't have to have 50 generations to understand something is sacred. But there is a very dangerous mentality in which people can approach something very consciously stripping away the idea of the sacredness so they can feel comfortable. You know what I'm saying? So you're going to find that there's a certain aspect of cultural retention, and then there's a certain aspect of, you know, innovation that happens anytime, the world gets smaller. People come together, the way food changes, the way accents change. All culture lives and breathes the same way. Now, so I always thought of it as a continuum. And I was like, the only thing that I could possibly do, aside from, holding on to this thing which is sacred, is to pray one day I have something to contribute to the continuum. So that generations from now, they'll be able to say, I didn't just eat from it, but I also gave something to it.
I grew up in a time called Once Upon a Time, which helps because I'm old. I'm 76 this Saturday. And I grew up in a time when people did a lot of talking. There was no, video games or computers or cell phones, anything like that. And so I was just lucky enough, I think, to grow up in a time when people did share and talk and laugh and sing. That's how I grew up. So that helped a lot. Because people just, in my family at least, talked and sang and went to church and sat on the front porch because I was born in the South. And a lot of people down South have porches to sit on so we can gather and talk. And I grew up with a lot of oral, voices in my head, but songs and rhymes and that's what we did back then. Played hopscotch and had little rhymes and hand clap games, and so all that is a part, I'm sure, helped in my learning to hear a certain sound or to know certain songs or just to know about things that have been passed on without even knowing they were passed on, just part of who I was back then. Just hearing these songs and playing these games and hearing how people sing those songs. And especially in church, when I didn't understand a lot of the songs sometimes, because they was sung so slowly. And like I said, a lot of call and response, and it went on so long, you fall asleep, and you wish you had listened more, and you didn't understand a lot, but the older you got, the more you understood. But anyway, I think a lot of that came from just my experiences growing up in the South and around people who talked and sang and a lot. And so, but I never thought about storytelling. And I don't think most people didn't. It was just what people did. It was part of what you did. And so I never even thought about storytelling at all. And until this is where the change came, when I adopted 2 children. And my first child, 6 weeks old, no problem, baby. Everything was fine until I adopted a boy. And he came with stories. He was like 3.5, almost 4 years old. So that changed things for me because he came with stories. And one story was, he was a TV addict, a different generation, right? And I tried to read bedtime stories like I did to my daughter, who was used to it. Read the story, read the story. And then when I tried to read the story, I noticed my son, my new son, I'm trying to, getting ready for bed. He says, I want to watch TV. What kind of kid is this? And I kept trying to read the book, and he was like moving around, picking his nose, anything. He could not listen. And I finally, after so many times, I realized I'm reading to a TV brain. Now, how do you get a TV brain to listen? So I started utilizing things I knew. And I started reading the story a little bit differently. And I would read the story like I was telling it. I don't know if you know what that means. I became the characters and I used my voice. If there was a dog in the story, if there was the witch, he went, whoa, maybe I better listen. If there was a cat, meow, I did all these things to get him to listen. And after a while, he said, Mama, are we going to have the bedtime story tonight? Yes. I got him. And then I took him to the library and I lucked out on that. So how all these things were happening, maybe because they were grooming me to do this, I'm not sure. But I went to the library and the librarian, a children's librarian, she would read stories at story time. And then she did a wonderful thing. She closed the book and put the book down and she started telling stories. I went, oh. So she wasn't just a librarian, she was a storyteller. And so he got it at the library and he got it at home. So what's the difference in reading a story and putting the book down and hearing the story told? There's a little difference there. And that difference was something I was used to when I was young. Eye contact, looking at me, making my own pictures in my head of what I see in the story. And so anyway, this went on for a while. And then finally, as I was telling more stories at home, I started telling myself. If I knew the book that I was going to be reading, I would just tell the story. I would make up stories. I would tell. And he was listening more and more and more. And finally, someone at my church asked me to be chairman of the Christmas program. And they were inviting children who came from shelters and their parents to come to our church for Christmas. And we had like food donated, toys, And I said, what are we going to do with all these children? I'm the chairman of the committee. I know nothing. And so I'm thinking maybe stories might be good. I can do some stories for a little program. And so I worked on some Christmas stories for the program. And I told my stories at this Christmas party. And my life has never been the same. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so that's kind of how I got into this. Being brought up in the South and hearing, stories told and songs sung and hand clap games and rhymes and rhythms. That's how I grew up. And the more I got into it, the more I was interested in researching something I didn't know. Because, a lot of us don't know our own stories. Mm-hmm. I wasn't taught these stories in school. I learned the white history of what they did. And so then I started researching myself and to find our stories, the stories I didn't hear
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I started my collection of different books. Zora Neale Hurston, of course. I got some of her books and got some Roger Abrams books and try to look for African-American stories I could tell to these children. I have some African stories that I tell, but I'm not from Africa. That really influences how I tell, because we came from there and that came with us.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to take a lot of stuff away, but the rhythm, the movement, the dance, the stories came with us. And so I try to look back and find stories, especially African stories that I can tell, that I understand and can communicate well. And so lately I've been telling the story of Sunjata. And so I use that story to get started in the storytelling part of the class. And they're learning about African-American storytelling and African storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, I know the story. And I try to tell this story with them of Sunjata. It's a long epic and different versions of it, different parts of his life. And the griots in West Africa still tell and know their story. Okay. So, and the griots are the history keepers, the memory keepers, and most kings back in Africa and had their own personal griots who would tell them the history of their ancestors and who died, who was born, what wars were fought, who won, stuff like that. You could tell them 7 generations of their family's history. I barely know 2 generations of my family's history.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the memory keepers, the griots. So I'll talk about all that in this class, right? And then I tell the story, but I actually ask them to watch how I tell the story. Because I tell the story in the African tradition, which is not just pure narration. And what does that mean? And so they tell me what that means to them, the narration. And I said, well, just watch what I use to make this story come to life. And then I tell the story. And then after the story, they give me all this feedback on what they saw. I said, what did I use to make the story come out? Well, you had a musician, because my musician is there playing the ancestor of the banjo, this old board banjo, right? And you use music. Oh yeah, I use music. And what else did I use? You use your voice. Of course I use my voice. I can't tell stories without using my voice. 7th graders.
Mm-hmm.
And then you use your face change. I said, oh, my face changed. I said, why not just keep my face the same? Oh, well, you wouldn't know what was happening. You wouldn't know how the characters were feeling. Oh, okay. So I made them think of all these things that are happening while I'm telling the story. Mm-hmm. Why not say, you be the king? You cannot be a king. Or you, the king? I don't think so. Why not just keep my voice the same? So they talk about all of this stuff and my body language, how I moved. Well, a lot of even African-American people ask me about that because they don't sing a lot themselves, or didn't grow up with songs like I did. Because back then, like I said, before TV, before all this stuff came in, people did a lot more of it. And a lot of people don't grow up with songs or grow up in the church like I did. I played the piano, and I grew up in churches that had no piano, where they played with their feet, And so it depends on your experiences. And I don't see much of what I do without song. I'm always looking for a song or singing a song or making up a song. I just made up a song the other day, and it took me a while. It's not a song. I wouldn't say a song. I'm not a songwriter. It's sort of an opening to a show that I'm trying to do for a festival. And the title of the show is I'm Okay, You're Okay. Now, what could I sing to open this show? And I'm thinking, so I just make up something. And I did a workshop before. They're making me think about what I do. They had me to come do a workshop. I said, what kind of workshop? Okay. How do you use song? So how do you teach that? I don't know. So I just brought a list of stories that I do. And I talked about how I added song. And I did that. And they loved that. And I did a workshop and I had them play with doing that. Just little short stories. Add a song. You know, something you want to sing. And you can sing a line instead of even say a line. And so we played with that. And because I think, and maybe that comes from, has been passed on from Africa to, because in African stories, I notice when they tell stories, in the middle of a story, they break out in song. You know, and when they got to the marketplace, you know, then the story goes on. So I noticed that as I researched how they do it. And I said that, well, that's how I do it. And I think that happens a lot in the Black church. Talk a little bit, sing a little bit, talk a little bit, sing a little bit. So it just is part of what happens in the culture. You know, it's in the culture. And so I use a lot of songs, old songs. Because a lot of even African-American storytellers ask me, where do you get all these songs? You sing a lot of songs. Because I like songs, for one thing. And like, sometimes I think of a story I do, like the story I did recently. It's a Jewish story. And I tell this story. And at the end, I say, a Jewish story coming out of an African-American mouth. Ain't that something? All stories are for everybody. It helps the human race, you know. And I think this story is about, you probably know this story, about a gossip. And she really puts down the woman at the marketplace and makes her feel bad. And of course, there's a big commotion when she does this because everybody is calling the woman these names and making fun of her. And they're taken before the judge. And the judge says, what is going on here in the marketplace? All this commotion. And the woman with the sharp tongue, she says, what I said at the marketplace, it was just a little joke. I didn't mean anything by it. It's having a little fun. But the woman who was hurt by the words, different story, you know. And the judge says, your words cannot be forgotten. No. Okay, I take everything back. Okay, I'm sorry I said anything. I'm sorry I said anything. I take all the words back. Everything's fine now, okay? 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 Oh. He says, no. Your cruel words cannot be forgotten. And he tells her to take this feather pillow to the marketplace and cut it. And let the feathers fly where they may. Then he said, and bring me back the feathers, every one. And of course, she can't bring them back. She tries. She just goes to the marketplace. The wind blows them everywhere. She's trying to get all the feathers back. But she can't. I couldn't get all the feathers back because the wind took them and blew them here and there and I couldn't. Oh, I guess it's the same with my words that I can't get back. And the judge says, oh, can you control the wind? No. But can you control the wind that comes out of your mouth? Cruel words, just like feathers, fly in the wind and can never be gotten back again. So when I finished that story, I went, I need a song. So of course, an old African-American song comes to me. And the song is, you better mind how you talk. You better mind what you're talking about. Because you got to give an account at the judgment. You better mind. You better mind. You better mind. Because you gotta give an account at the judgment. You better mind. So I use songs to help bring a strong point about what the story is trying to tell us. You know, and then I'll just make up songs that maybe that connect with words in the story. Like when I do the knee-high man, a little man who was so short who wanted to be tall, I just sing that at the end. He wanted to be tall, not short. He wanted to be tall, not short. He wanted something he really didn't need. You know, so I use all those words in the story to bring up songs. I just love adding songs to what I do, and I want the people listening to my stories to feel, not just to listen, to feel what these stories are saying. If there's laughter, if the person's really happy, I want you to feel that joy he's feeling. Oh no, my wife. You know, I want them to feel what these characters are feeling. And over 20 years now, I started working with a musician. And it's hard to find musicians to do what he can do. So he's worked with me quite a few years now. He knows what I need and what I want. Because most musicians, they play very well. Like I had to audition him because I didn't want, he played the banjo and the guitar. And at that time when I hired him, I wanted a banjo player. Because I was going to the Hollywood Bowl in LA to do a program. I wanted a musician, like music to bring the kids in, the story to start. And that musician had moved away to North Carolina, so I needed a new musician. And so I interviewed him, and he couldn't be just plink to plink to plink. And so he played pretty good. I went, ooh. But I explained what I needed. I'm a storyteller. And it's not about the music. It's about the story. So the music has to be complementary to the story. You know, it can't just be playing. And sometimes I want no music. It depends on what I'm saying. If important lines are being said, I don't want you just playing. That won't work. You have to give me that pause and let me say those lines. And you have to also play with the feeling of the story. You know, and I've worked with other musicians that just keep playing nice little song, beautiful song, but just keep playing to the words, just playing. And if they're not even listening to my story, you have to listen because you have to know when to stop. Know for the pauses, and know when to bring that one note in. Blink. Uh-oh. You know, you have to know when to do that, but you have to listen to the story. And so, so over the years, I've stuck with him because he knows how to listen and play the mood of the story and pauses. And when you come back in the story after the pause, come back with the right feeling. Not just, you know, it can't be, it depends on what's happening in the story. And so he knows how to do that. And so I thought of this workshop title, thinking about what I do and how I do it. The workshop is called Pitch, Pace, and Pause. So I thought of those three things are very important in how I tell my story. The pacing, the pausing. Oh, what do you mean? My voice changing, going up, going down low, and then facial changes. All of this happens because of the characters in the story. They make me change. And kids always asking me this question, how do you do that? I let the characters come through me. I don't know how that happens, but maybe it's like an actor, but I'm not an actor. But I try to get Diane out of the way and let the characters come through me when I'm telling the story. Like even when I do the little rhyme, fee, fi, fo, fum. I don't have to say it like that. I could say fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an African American. Be he alive? It's not the same. I want to be the giant. Fee, fi, fo, you know. So it's just letting the characters come through you and having fun with the story. That's how I was told stories. And that's how I'm used to telling stories. And I think the stories that I tell really change a lot when I have an audience, because they give me feedback on what they're processing. And if they don't understand something, they go, the face will change, or they go, ooh, huh? you know, if they're shocked. Like one little boy, when I said in one story that the police were called, he went, "What?" And I responded to him right then. Yes, can you believe that they called the police? Right. So it makes the story just come alive. All this stuff is happening. Then I said, and then they called his mama. He went, "Oh no!" They called his mama. So it was like all this stuff happening. And so I let all that make me change and adapt how I tell the story, and what we felt that we couldn't express. You know, a lot of what we felt, especially during the time of slavery, it came out in our stories. It came out in our songs. If you really listen to some of those stories, some of the songs, all of how we felt came out in those stories. And I told one of those stories at the big festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And the story is very famous stories, but you can see how, because we had to be very careful about what you said during the time of slavery. So when stories were told like that, told it amongst yourselves. So a lot of those stories were told inside the culture. You see, they weren't told outside the culture because it was a release of getting how we felt out. Mm-hmm. And the story is, well, there's many stories, but one story I tell is about a slave owner. He was always a good-natured master, you know, and you had a few, and he was always sharing the dreams he had with his good slave Ike, right? And he always had to be the best one. He had to have the best dream all the time. And Ike always had to admit, "Yeah, master, you had the best dream. Yeah, you beat me." One day, Ike was going up to the big house, up to the master's bedroom to clean it as usual. And when he got up there, the master was still in bed. And Ike said, "Master, something wrong?" "Oh, Ike, I had a terrible dream, terrible dream." He said, "What is it, master? Tell me about it." "Oh, no, Ike, it's too terrible to tell, too terrible to tell." He said, "Now, come on, master. You know you always tell me. You know you do." "Oh, but this is just too terrible to tell, Ike." "Come on, master. You know you always do. Now tell me about it." "All right, Ike. Last night I had a dream. I went to black man's heaven." "Oh, you should have seen it, Ike. Oh, it was dirty streets everywhere, mud and dirt, no broken down shacks. And the fences were all caved in." He said there was watermelon rinds all over the place, chicken bones scattered here and there. And there was raggedy men, women, and children running all around. It was the worst place I ever saw. It was just terrible, Ike. And Ike, he looked at the master and he said, the three most important words in African American culture. He said, "You know, master, we sure must have ate the same thing. Because I had a dream too." "You did? Tell me about it." "Master, last night I had a dream. I went to white man's heaven." "Oh, master, you should have seen it, master. Streets were paved with silver and gold, and there was plenty of milk and honey. You should have seen those mansions, master. Oh, and those pearly gates glittering with gold and silver. Oh, it was the most beautiful place I ever saw." Master said, "Well, yeah. But master, there was one thing wrong." The master sat up in bed and said, "Wrong? What could be wrong?" "Well, master, there was nobody there. I got shoes. You got shoes. All of God's children got shoes. When we get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes. We're gonna walk all over God's heaven. heaven. Gonna walk all over God's heaven. Everybody talking about heaven, ain't going there. Heaven, heaven. We're gonna walk all over God's heaven. That was told inside the culture for a reason. We get our feelings out. You couldn't say a lot of stuff. You get it out through a story. Yeah.